He was a titan of industry, the man on the cover of Forbes, living in a penthouse that touched the clouds. She was his brilliant, beautiful, and 7 months pregnant wife. But in one single brutal moment, her perfect world was shattered. He traded her for a younger model, his ambitious mistress, leaving his expectant wife with nothing but a pittance and the cold, hard streets. He thought he had destroyed her. He thought she would disappear. He never imagined that the woman he cast aside would spend the next 3 years forging an empire from the ashes of her broken heart. This is the unbelievable true story of Amelia Hayes. The woman who didn't just get even. She got everything. The city lights of New York spread out beneath their 80th floor penthouse like a carpet of fallen stars. From this vantage point inside the gilded cage Ethan Vance had so carefully constructed, Amelia Hayes had once felt like the queen of the world. The air itself seemed different up here. Thinner, crisper, smelling of success and expensive perfume. Tonight, it smelled only of lies. Amelia ran a hand over the taut curve of her stomach, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips as she felt a gentle kick from within. Mina. They had already decided on the name. It was the only thing lately that felt real, this new life growing inside her. Everything else, the lavish parties, the fawning society pages that called them the city's golden couple, and especially the man she loved, felt increasingly distant, like a photograph fading into the sun. Ethan Vance, CEO of the colossal real estate empire Vance and Sterling Holdings, was a man sculpted from ambition and charm. When Amelia had met him 5 years ago, he was a rising star, and she was a gifted architect at Innovate Architecture, one of the city's most prestigious firms, her name already attached to 2 award-winning designs. They were a perfect match, his business acumen, her creative vision. They had planned to build an empire together. "You're too brilliant to be working for someone else, Ames," he had told her, his voice a silken trap. "When we have this baby, you should step back. Focus on us, on our family. The company is secure. We are secure." She had agreed. How could she not? She loved him, and the dream he sold her was intoxicating. So she'd left her promising career, trading her blueprints and hard hat for sonograms and prenatal yoga. She had thrown herself into creating the perfect home, the perfect nest for their coming child, while Ethan's late nights at the office became later his business trips more frequent. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually attached to his hand screen down. When she questioned him, he'd flashed that disarming smile. "Building a legacy for our daughter, my love. It all takes time." Tonight, the time for lies had run out. He came home just as the last embers of sunset bled from the sky. He didn't kiss her, didn't even glance at her swollen belly. He walked straight to the marble-topped bar, his movements stiff and rehearsed, and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He only ever poured 2 glasses when he was about to deliver bad news. "Amelia," he began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a subordinate. "We need to talk." A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through her. "Ethan, what is it? You're scaring me." He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany of the coffee table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "I'm leaving," he said. The words were simple, clinical, yet they detonated in the silent room, shattering the fragile peace. Amelia stared at him, her mind refusing to process the statement. "Leaving? What do you mean, leaving? For a business trip you just got back." He took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes cold as glass. "No, Amelia, I'm leaving you." The room tilted. The city lights blurred into a meaningless smear. For who?" She whispered the words, catching in her throat like shards of glass. "It doesn't matter," he said, but his gaze flickered a micro-expression of guilt he couldn't quite suppress. "Tell me," she demanded, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "After 5 years of marriage with your child inside me, you owe me that much. Tell me her name." He sighed a sound of pure annoyance, as if her heartbreak was a tedious inconvenience. "Isabella," he finally said. "Isabella Rossi." The name hit Amelia like a physical blow. Isabella Rossi. A piranha in a designer dress, a junior executive at his own company, known for her ruthless ambition and for using her siren-like beauty to get ahead. Amelia had met her at company. Functions had felt the woman's covetous eyes on her life, on her husband. She had dismissed it as professional jealousy. How naive she had been. "She understands me," Ethan continued, the justification tumbling out, now polished and practiced. "She understands the pressures I'm under. She's ambitious, driven. With you, it's all about feelings, about nesting. I need a partner, Amelia, not a housewife. You've become complacent." Complacent. The word was a slap in the face. He had begged her to leave her career to build this nest he now scorned. Her shock began to curdle into a hot, righteous anger. "How long, Ethan?" "A year," he admitted, looking away. "Maybe a little more." A year. A whole year of shared smiles, of whispered plans for their daughter, of him holding her and telling her he loved her. Every memory was now tainted a scene from a well-acted play. He had been living a double life while she was growing their child. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "The envelope," he gestured, "contains the divorce papers. I've been more than generous. A one-time payment. You sign it along with the NDA and you walk away. No mess, no drama." She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a settlement agreement. The number was substantial enough to look good on paper, but for a man of his billionaire status, it was pocket change. A nuisance fee. And then she saw it, the non-disclosure agreement, a thicket of legalese designed to gag her, to erase her from his history. Her eyes scanned the cold, hard text. She was to make no public statements, give no interviews, write no books. She was to vanish from the world of Ethan Vance as if she had never existed. A memory sharp and painful flashed in her mind. A warm summer evening years ago, sitting on the fire escape of her tiny first apartment. Ethan, his eyes bright with dreams, was sketching on a napkin. "One day, Ames," he'd said, grabbing her hand, "we'll build something that lasts forever. An empire of our own." Vance and Hayes. What about Vance and Sterling? She had teased. Sterling was his father's old partner, a silent investor. "He's the old guard," Ethan had laughed. "We're the future." Now that future was a smoldering ruin. She looked at the man before her, a stranger in her husband's expensive suit. The boy who had sketched dreams on a napkin was gone, replaced by a ruthless king guarding a tarnished throne. "I won't sign it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan's face hardened. "Don't be a fool, Amelia. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I built this world. I can just as easily unmake you in it. Take the deal. It's the last nice thing I'll ever do for you." He finished his scotch, placed the glass down with a decisive click, and walked towards the door, not looking back. Ethan, she cried out, a raw, desperate sound. Our daughter. What about Mina? He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a fleeting moment she saw a crack in his armor, a flicker of something human. Then it was gone, sealed over with ice. Isabella is young. We'll have our own children. He said the words hanging in the air like poison. You'll be provided for. That's more than most get. And with that, he opened the door and walked out of her life, leaving Amelia alone in the silent penthouse, the signed divorce papers on the table, like a death certificate for the life she once knew. The golden cage had burst open, not to free her, but to cast her out into the cold. The city lights outside no longer looked like stars. They looked like the mocking eyes of a world that had suddenly and brutally turned against her. The silence Ethan left behind was heavier than any sound. For 2 days, Amelia drifted through the vast, opulent emptiness of the penthouse, a ghost in her own life. The scent of his cologne lingered in the closet, a cruel reminder of the man who was now a stranger. The baby room, painted a soft buttercup yellow and filled with toys she had lovingly assembled, was a room of promises broken. Every object was a monument to a shared future that had been a lie. The 3rd day brought the lawyers. Not men in suits for a civilized discussion, but a notification, cold and impersonal, slipped under her door. She had 48 hours to vacate the premises. The property was solely in the name of a trust controlled by Vance and Sterling Holdings. She had never questioned it. She had trusted him. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through her stupor. She tried to call her credit card company to pay for a hotel, only to be met with a sterile automated voice. This card has been cancelled. She tried to log into their joint bank account, the one she had poured her savings into when they first got married. The balance was 0. A transaction history showed a single massive transfer to an offshore account 2 days prior. He had systematically, meticulously, surgically removed her from his life. The generous settlement he had offered now felt like a taunt. It was contingent on her signing the NDA. Without it, she had nothing. With it, she had a pittance and a gag order. With her own funds gone, she had no choice. A courier arrived, a young man who wouldn't meet her eyes, and she signed away her voice, her story, her name, in exchange for a check that wouldn't even cover 3 months' rent in a decent part of the city. Leaving the penthouse was a blur of humiliation. The doorman who had greeted her with a warm, "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," for years, now stared at the floor as she struggled with her 2 suitcases, a box of personal effects, and the crushing weight of her own body. He held the door open, his face a mask of professional indifference. She was no longer Mrs. Vance. She was a liability. She found a small 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, a world away from the gleaming spires of Manhattan. The air was thick with the smell of sizzling onions and exhaust fumes. The paint on the walls was peeling. The faucet in the kitchen dripped a relentless, maddening rhythm, and the radiator clanked and hissed like a dying beast. This was her new reality. Desperate, she swallowed her pride and called Michael Renner, her old boss at Innovate Architecture. He had always been her champion, the one who had predicted she'd be one of the greats. "Michael, it's Amelia Hayes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Amelia," he finally said, his tone strained. I heard what happened. I'm sorry." "I need a job, Michael," she said, cutting to the chase. "Anything. I can freelance, I can work from home. I need to work." The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken words. "I can't, Amelia. he said, his voice low. "There's nothing here for you. We're downsizing that department." "I don't believe you," she said, a new kind of cold seeping into her bones. "You told me I'd always have a place there." "Things change," he said, and the corporate chill in his voice was unmistakable. "Look off the record. Ethan Vance has a very long reach. His company is one of our biggest clients now. Having you on the payroll, it would be a conflict of interest. It would be unwise. You're seen as a liability, Amelia. I'm truly sorry." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in her ear, the sound of every door in her old life slamming shut. Ethan hadn't just left her. He had salted the earth behind him, ensuring she couldn't even return to the career she had given up for him. He hadn't just unmade her. He had blacklisted her. The following weeks were a brutal education in survival. She navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy of social services, her pregnant belly a silent testament to her fall from grace. She learned to budget by the dime, to choose between buying fresh fruit or paying the electricity bill on time. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy cloak she couldn't take off. One afternoon, struggling up the 5 flights of stairs with a bag of groceries, she dropped her keys. As she bent down, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she slumped against the wall. Tears of sheer exhaustion and frustration finally overflowing. "Here, my dear. Let me help you." The voice was kind, accented with the gentle lilt of Eastern Europe. An elderly woman with silver hair braided in a neat crown and eyes that held a lifetime of wisdom was holding out her keys. It was her next-door neighbor, a woman she'd only ever nodded to in the hallway. "I am Elena Petrova," the woman said, helping Amelia with her grocery bag. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the world, not just a baby." That small act of kindness broke something open in Amelia. Inside her bare apartment over a cup of weak tea, the whole story came pouring out. Mrs. Petrova listened patiently, her hands gnarled from decades of work patting Amelia's. She was a retired seamstress, a widow who had seen her own share of hardship. She didn't offer platitudes or pity. She offered practical help. When Amelia went into labor 2 months later, it was Mrs. Petrova who held her hand in the taxi to the public hospital. The birth was long and arduous, a 24-hour ordeal she faced without a partner, without family. But when the nurse finally placed the tiny, wailing baby in her arms, a fierce, protective love surged through Amelia, so potent it eclipsed everything else. She looked down at her daughter's perfect, scrunched-up face. "Hello, Mina," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's you and me now." The joy of that moment was pure and absolute, but it was tinged with the bitter reality of their circumstances. As she held her daughter in the sterile, crowded hospital ward, she made a silent, solemn vow. She would not let Ethan Vance's cruelty define their lives. She would not be a victim. For Mina, she would fight back. She didn't know how, but as she looked at the tiny fingers curled around her own, Amelia knew she had to find a way. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a future, a real future, on the ruins of the old one. 3 years crawled by each day, a testament to the grinding monotony of survival. The city that had once been Amelia's playground was now a relentless taskmaster. Her life was a carefully constructed mosaic of low-wage jobs, a patchwork of shifts designed around Mina's daycare schedule. Mornings were spent in the greasy spoon haze of a diner, her apron smelling of burnt coffee and fried bacon, as she balanced plates and forced smiles for tips that barely covered the subway fare. Evenings after picking up a chattering Happy Mina were for a hurried dinner and bedtime stories, and nights when the city finally exhaled and Mina was asleep were for her third job, cleaning the soulless, empty offices of a downtown law firm. A ghost haunting corridors of power she could no longer access. Mina was her son, a bright, inquisitive child with her father's charming mull and her mother's determined eyes. She was blissfully unaware of their poverty, her world filled with the magic of sidewalk chalk drawings, stories about brave princesses who saved themselves and the unwavering, all-encompassing love of her mother. Amelia shielded her from the harsh realities with the ferocity of a lioness. The eviction notices the carefully counted coins at the grocery store, the threadbare winter coat, none of it ever touched Mina. Her daughter's laughter was the fuel that kept Amelia going, but in the deep, silent hours of the night, after the office floors were mopped and the trash cans emptied, another Amelia emerged. This was the architect, the dreamer, the woman who had once designed award-winning buildings. In the small corner of her cramped apartment that she called her studio, with a second-hand drafting tablet she'd bought with a month's worth of saved tips, she would work. From midnight until 3 a.m., fueled by cheap instant coffee, she would design. She poured all her frustration, her anger, her stifled creativity into these designs. They were radical, innovative, and deeply personal. She designed sustainable, low-cost housing that felt like a community, not a complex. She designed public parks that integrated nature with urban landscapes in ways no one else was imagining. This was her rebellion, her silent scream against the world that had cast her out. To give her work a voice, she started a blog. She called it the Urban Phoenix, a name that felt both aspirational and deeply true. Under the pseudonym A.H. Phoenixes, she posted her renderings, her essays on the future of architecture, and her critiques of the sterile, profit-driven glass boxes that were sprouting all over the city, many of them built by companies like Vance and Sterling Holdings. The blog was an anonymous shout into the digital void, but slowly, miraculously, the void started to shout back. At first, it was just a few comments from architecture students. Then other professionals started to take notice. Her posts were shared in niche forums. Her ideas were debated, praised, and sometimes criticized, but they were being seen. The Urban Phoenix began to cultivate a small but fiercely loyal following, people who were hungry for a vision of architecture that was about people, not just profits. Meanwhile, the world of Ethan Vance continued to spin in a different orbit. He and Isabella Rossi were the darlings of the New York social and business scene. Their photos were splashed across magazines at galas, on yachts, cutting ribbons for new ostentatious skyscrapers. Vance and Sterling Holdings was more powerful than ever. But if one looked closely past the glossy veneer of success, the cracks were beginning to show. Isabella, now a senior vice president, was pushing for more power, her ambition a constant gnawing pressure on Ethan. His business decisions, once bold and strategic, were becoming increasingly reckless, driven by a need to top his last success, to build higher, shinier, more expensive monuments to his own ego. One night in his sterile, minimalist penthouse, the same one he had shared with Amelia, now redecorated in cold chrome and black leather by Isabella, Ethan was nursing a tumbler of whiskey. An acquisition had fallen through, a project was over budget, and a tense argument with Isabella still echoed in his ears. Bored and restless, he found himself scrolling through an industry news aggregator on his tablet. A link caught his eye: "Is the Urban Phoenix the future of American architecture?" He clicked. He saw designs that were audacious, brilliant, and strangely familiar in their underlying philosophy, a focus on human-centric design that he hadn't thought about since his earliest days with Amelia. He scoffed at the writer's idealism, but found himself scrolling through post after post, intrigued by the sheer talent on display. He saw a design for a cantilevered community library that was both breathtakingly beautiful and structurally ingenious. "Who the hell is this A.H. Phoenix?" he muttered to himself, a flicker of professional jealousy stirring within him. He was the king of New York real estate. How had this anonymous blogger, this nobody, come up with something so compelling? He dismissed it as the work of some academic dreamer and closed the tablet, pouring himself another drink, completely unaware that he had just been admiring the work of the wife he had thrown away. A few weeks later, Amelia received an email through her blog's contact form. It was different from the usual comments or fan mail. The sender's address was encrypted, and the message was brief and direct. Subject: your vision. Ms. Phoenix, I have been following your work for some time. Your vision is not just compelling, it is necessary. I believe it is also highly profitable. I am a private investor interested in turning your designs into reality. If you are interested in a partnership that would provide you with the capital and resources to build your own firm on your own terms, I propose a meeting. Discretion is assured. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. It could be a scam, a cruel joke, but it could also be real. After 3 years in the wilderness, after countless nights of thankless work, a door had appeared in the wall she had been fruitlessly beating against. With trembling hands, her mind racing with a mixture of terror and hope, she typed a single-word reply: "When?" This was it. The first tremor of the earthquake that was about to shake Ethan Vance's world to its foundations. The Phoenix was no longer just sketching in the ashes. She was preparing to rise. The address sent to her was for a discreet private club in Midtown, the kind of place with no sign, just a polished brass number on a heavy oak door. It was a world Amelia had once belonged to, a world she now felt like an imposter in. She had spent a week's food money on a simple but professional-looking second-hand dress and had left Mina with a beaming Mrs. Petrova, promising to be back to tuck her in. Walking into the hushed wood-paneled interior felt like stepping onto a stage. A man in a tailored suit met her at the door. "Ms. Phoenix, Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the library." The name hit her with the force of a physical shock. Sterling, as in Vance and Sterling Holdings. It couldn't be. Julian Sterling was Ethan's silent partner, the old guard Ethan had been so eager to usurp. He was a legendary, almost mythical figure in the industry, a man who hadn't been seen publicly in years. She was led into a room lined with floor-to-ceiling books, the air smelling of old leather and wealth. A man stood by the fireplace, his back to her. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and an impeccably tailored suit that hung on a still powerful frame. When he turned his eyes, a piercing shade of blue assessed her with an unnerving intensity. This was Julian Sterling. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He hadn't used her pseudonym. "Or do you prefer Phoenix? I must say it's remarkably fitting." Amelia's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. "You know who I am. I make it my business to know everything about the people who interest me," he said, gesturing to a leather armchair. "And you, my dear, are the most interesting person to emerge in the world of architecture in a decade. Please sit." She sat her back, ramrod straight. "Why am I here, Mr. Sterling? Are you here on Ethan's behalf?" A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. Ethan! He scoffed the name, dripping with disdain. Ethan Vance is a boy who inherited a kingdom and thinks he built it. He has taken the solid foundation his father and I built and is turning it into a gaudy casino. No, I am not here on his behalf. I am here because I have a vested interest in seeing that boy's casino go bust. He explained that his partnership with Ethan's father had been one of mutual respect and shared vision. When the elder Vance passed away, Julian had agreed to stay on as a silent partner to honor his friend's legacy, letting the ambitious young Ethan take the reins. It was a decision he had come to regret profoundly. He's a gambler, not a builder, Sterling said, his gaze fixed on the fire. He leverages the company's assets for vanity projects, prioritizes flashover stability, and surrounds himself with sycophants like that woman, Isabella Rossi. He is steering a perfectly good ship directly towards an iceberg, and my name is still on the hull. He paused, turning his piercing gaze back to her. For 2 years, I have been looking for a strategic countermove, a way to protect my investment and, frankly, my legacy. I considered a hostile takeover a proxy war on the board. All ugly, messy business. And then I discovered a blog called The Urban Phoenix. I saw designs that were not just brilliant, but strategic, sustainable, community-focused, the very antithesis of everything Ethan is building. I saw the future, and I knew I had found my weapon. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just an architect to him. She was a weapon to be aimed at her ex-husband. "You want to use me to destroy him," she said, the words tasting like ash. "No, Ms. Hayes," he corrected her gently. "I want to invest in you. I want to give you the resources to build a company that will make his obsolete. Ethan's downfall will simply be a byproduct of your success. There's a difference." He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict warring within her. He leaned forward, his voice softening. "He didn't just leave you. I know he had you blacklisted. I know Michael Renner at Innovate Architecture folded under the pressure. I know you've spent the last 3 years cleaning offices to feed your daughter. I am not offering you revenge. I am offering you justice. The chance to reclaim the career he stole from you to build a future for your child on your own terms. I will be your silent partner. The money, the connections, they will be yours. But the vision, the leadership, the company, that will be all Amelia Hayes." She thought of Mina. She thought of the eviction notices, the condescending looks from social workers, the soul-crushing exhaustion. She thought of her designs, her ideas languishing on a blog. Julian Sterling wasn't offering a handout. He was offering a battlefield on which she could finally fight. Her revenge wouldn't be a messy personal affair. It would be a corporate execution, clean and final. "What do you call this new company?" he asked, already knowing her answer. A slow smile spread across Amelia's face, the first genuine, confident smile in years. "Phoenix Architecture," she said. He nodded, a corresponding smile in his eyes. "Perfect." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With Sterling's backing, Phoenix Architecture was officially incorporated. Amelia leased a modest but stylish office space in a burgeoning arts district, a far cry from the corporate towers of Midtown, and deliberately so. She used Sterling's network to her advantage, but she was the one in control. Her first move was strategic and deeply satisfying. She reached out to 2 of the most talented young architects at Innovate Architecture, the very firm that had rejected her. She knew they were frustrated, their creative ideas constantly shot down by the conservative, profit-obsessed management. She didn't offer them outrageous salaries. She offered them something far more valuable, a chance to build something meaningful. She met them in a coffee shop, spreading her designs for the urban phoenix across the table. Their eyes lit up. "I'm not building glass boxes for billionaires," Amelia told them, her voice resonating with a passion they hadn't seen in years. "I'm building a new kind of city. Are you in?" They didn't hesitate. They handed in their resignations the next day, sending a small but significant shockwave through their old firm. Amelia Hayes was no longer a victim. She was a CEO. She had a team, she had capital, and she had a blueprint. Not just for a new building, but for a new life. The game was on. Phoenix architecture did not explode onto the New York scene with the force of a supernova. It was more insidious, more strategic. Amelia started small, taking on the projects the Goliaths like Vance and Sterling wouldn't touch a non-profit community. Arts Center, a pro bono design for a homeless shelter, the retrofitting of an old factory into sustainable, affordable loft apartments. These weren't the headline-grabbing, skyline-altering projects, but they were smart. They were portfolio builders, and they got noticed. Each completed project was a masterclass in the Phoenix philosophy. Innovative design, sustainable materials, and a deep intuitive connection to the community it served. The Arts Center won a prestigious local design award. The factory lofts were featured in a major architectural magazine, praised for their human-first approach. Word began to spread through the industry. There was a new player in town, and she was changing the rules. Amelia, once anonymous, stepped into the spotlight. Julian Sterling had coached her, but her presence was all her own. In interviews, she was poised, articulate, and fiercely passionate. She didn't speak of her past, but she didn't need to. The media, sniffing out the contours of a spectacular story, began to piece it together. The narrative was irresistible, the single mother cast aside by a ruthless tycoon who had built a visionary company from the ground up. She wasn't just an architect, she was a symbol of resilience. The success of Phoenix began to have a tangible effect on Vance and Sterling Holdings. A progressive city council, enamored with Phoenix's community-centric vision, awarded a lucrative public park project to Amelia's firm, a project Ethan had considered a lock. Then a wealthy, eco-conscious tech billionaire, who was planning a new headquarters, publicly announced he was dropping Vance and Sterling in favor of Phoenix architecture, citing their forward-thinking ethos. Ethan Vance watched Amelia's ascent with a mixture of disbelief and mounting rage. At first, he'd dismissed her company as a boutique charity firm. Now that charity firm was stealing his clients and his headlines. The city that had once worshipped him was now fawning over the woman he had discarded. His paranoia grew festering in the sterile luxury of his life. He couldn't understand how she had done it. Where had she gotten the capital? The connections? He launched a private investigation, and when the report came back, he stared at the name on the page in stunned fury. Julian Sterling. His own partner. The old man he had mocked and sidelined had been secretly funding his ex-wife's corporate insurgency against him. It was a betrayal so profound, it left him reeling. The pressure began to take its toll. His decisions became more erratic, his temper more volatile. He pushed his teams to the breaking point, demanding bigger, more extravagant designs to outshine Amelia. But they came across as desperate and soulless. The atmosphere at Vance and Sterling grew toxic. Isabella Rossi, ever the opportunist, saw the writing on the wall. The power couple image was fracturing. The company's stock was dipping. Ethan was becoming a liability, not an asset. She began quietly consulting with lawyers, exploring how to disentangle her finances from his. She started discreetly selling off her shares in the company, a little at a time, and making quiet inquiries with competitors. One of those inquiries was a carefully worded email to an executive at Phoenix Architecture, testing the waters. The inevitable confrontation happened at an industry awards gala. Amelia was there to accept a Visionary of the Year award. Ethan was there because he had to be his presence, a requirement to maintain the illusion of his dominance. He watched from his table as she walked to the stage, radiant in a simple, elegant black dress, a picture of grace and power. Her acceptance speech was short and impactful. She spoke of building communities, not just buildings. She spoke of architecture as a service, not an indulgence. She never mentioned his name, but every word was a condemnation of his entire philosophy. Later he cornered her near the terrace, the city lights twinkling behind them like a scene from their past. "This is quite a show you're putting on, Amelia." He sneered, his voice low and venomous. "You and that old snake Sterling." Amelia looked at him not with the pain of a jilted wife, but with the cool assessment of a rival CEO. The years of heartache had forged something unbreakable within her. She was no longer afraid of him. "It's not a show, Ethan," she replied calmly. "It's just good business." "You think you can take me on?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I will bury you. I'll tell the world everything. How you were unstable, emotional." She cut him off, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You do that. You drag your pregnant wife's name through the mud and see how that plays out for you in the press. You think you look like a titan now. You'll look like a monster. The woman you tried to destroy, the one you called complacent and uninspiring, is the one who is making you obsolete. Your mistake wasn't leaving me, Ethan. Your mistake was underestimating me." She held his gaze for a long moment, letting the truth of her words sink in. He saw no fear in her eyes, no lingering affection. He saw only a formidable opponent who knew exactly where to strike. Without another word, Amelia turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone on the terrace, the chill of the night air seeping into his bones. He was no longer looking at his discarded wife. He was looking at the architect of his ruin. The phoenix had risen, and its shadow was beginning to eclipse his entire empire. The duel between Phoenix Architecture and Vance and Sterling Holdings became the talk of New York's financial world. It was a battle of philosophies played out in steel, glass, and concrete. For every soulless, extravagant tower, Ethan announced Amelia would counter with an elegant, sustainable, and critically acclaimed project that won the hearts of the city and its planners. His empire, built on the shifting sands of ego and leverage, began to crumble under the weight of its own hubris. His gambles had failed to pay off. A luxury condo project in Dubai went bust, leaving the company exposed to massive foreign debt. His increasingly erratic behavior at board meetings alienated the few allies he had left. The final desperate nail in his coffin was an attempt to secure a merger with a larger international conglomerate. They did their due diligence and saw the truth. Vance and Sterling was a house of cards propped up by debt and a CEO whose reputation was in tatters. The deal collapsed spectacularly. While Ethan was fighting fires, Amelia was playing a different, far more strategic game. Her target was not Vance and Sterling. That would be too easy, too direct. Her revenge was to be more poetic. With Julian Sterling's guidance and capital, she had been quietly, patiently, and anonymously buying up shares in another company, Innovate Architecture. It was the firm that had nurtured her talent and then cast her out at Ethan's command. It was the firm where Michael Renner, her former mentor, still sat as CEO, a man who had traded his loyalty for a lucrative contract with Ethan's company. Innovate was struggling a mid-tier firm, being squeezed out by giants like Vance and Sterling and nimble visionaries like Phoenix. Its stock was undervalued, and its shareholders were getting restless. It was ripe for the picking. Through a series of shell corporations set up by Sterling's legal team, Amelia became its largest single shareholder. No one on the board knew. They just saw a mysterious new investor steadily increasing their stake. The day she reached a controlling interest, she acted. An email was sent to the board of Innovate Architecture, invoking a clause in the corporate bylaws that allowed the majority shareholder to call an emergency meeting. The agenda was listed as a strategic acquisition proposal. The board members gathered in their sleek, sterile conference room, the same room Amelia had once presented her designs in. There was a nervous energy in the air. Michael Renner, his face etched with worry, stood at the head of the table. The door opened, and in walked Julian Sterling's lead attorney. "Good morning, the lawyer said. "The majority shareholder of this company has a proposal for you. They have authorized the acquisition of Innovate Architecture in its entirety. The deal is non-negotiable and overwhelmingly backed by shareholder interest." A wave of murmurs went through the room. Who is the shareholder?" Renner demanded. The lawyer simply smiled and stepped aside, holding the door open. Amelia Hayes walked in. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the room. Jaws literally dropped. Michael Renner stared at her, his face draining of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. She was not the desperate pregnant woman begging him for a job. She was dressed in a tailored, commanding power suit, her expression calm, her eyes holding a glint of cold, hard steel. She walked to the head of the table, placing her briefcase down softly on the polished wood. She looked directly at Michael Renner. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice even and clear, resonating with an authority he had never heard from her before. "It's been a long time." She didn't need to raise her voice. Her very presence was a thunderclap. She was no longer the liability. She was the owner. "As of 9 a.m. this morning," she announced to the stunned room, "Phoenix Architecture has acquired a controlling interest in this firm. We are now your parent company." She let that sink in, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the men who had deemed her unemployable. Then her eyes settled back on Renner. 3 years ago," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I came to you for help. I was a loyal employee who had given this firm some of its most acclaimed work. I was also pregnant and desperate, and you told me I was a liability. You said it was unwise to associate with me because you were afraid of losing Ethan Vance's business." She paused, letting the memory hang in the air like a guillotine. "Well, Ethan Vance's business is now worthless, and you, Michael, made a bad investment. You traded your integrity for a client who was already on a sinking ship. That's not just disloyal, it's poor leadership." She looked around the room. "Phoenix Architecture is about vision, loyalty, and courage. It is about building things that last. We have no room for anyone who does not share those values." She turned her full attention back to the pale, trembling man at the end of the table. "Michael Renner," she said the words crisp and final. "You're fired." The news of the hostile takeover and the dramatic firing sent an earthquake through the industry. Vance and Sterling Holdings, now completely isolated and financially hemorrhaging, filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy a week later. It was checkmate. Amelia hadn't just defeated her king. She had captured the entire board. The fall of Ethan Vance was as swift as it was brutal. The bankruptcy proceedings stripped him of everything: the company, the penthouse, the private jet. He was a pariah in the world he had once ruled, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Isabella Rossi, ever the survivor, had vanished long before the final collapse, having cashed out her shares and moved to Europe, her name surfacing months later on the arm of a Swiss banker. She had never been a partner. She had been a passenger, and she had jumped ship at the first sign of trouble. The last time Amelia saw Ethan wasn't in a boardroom or a courtroom, but in a fleeting, anonymous moment. She was in a town car heading to a site meeting when she saw him on the street. He was a ghost of his former self, thinner, stooped, his expensive suit replaced by clothes that didn't quite fit. He was staring up at the new Phoenix Architecture headquarters, a stunning, innovative building that had just won the coveted Pritzker Prize, the highest honor in architecture. His face was a mask of hollow regret. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second through the tinted glass. There was no anger left in his gaze, only the vast, empty expanse of defeat. The car moved on, and he was gone. Amelia's victory was complete, but it didn't taste of vengeance. It tasted of vindication. Her focus was not on the empire she had toppled, but on the one she was building. The final scene of her transformation was not set in a corporate tower, but on a once derelict plot of land in the Bronx. It was a piece of land Vance and Sterling had acquired years ago, slated for another luxury high-rise that would have cast a shadow over the working-class neighborhood. Now it was the site of the grand opening of the Mina's Place Community Center. It was Amelia's masterpiece. A beautiful light-filled building that housed a daycare, a public library, a job training center, and a rooftop garden that provided fresh produce for the local community. It was everything she believed architecture should be: hopeful, helpful, and human. A crowd had gathered for the opening ceremony: city officials, community leaders, and the families who would use the center. In the front row sat Mrs. Petrova, her eyes shining with tears of pride. Next to her, fidgeting in a pretty yellow dress, was Mina, now a bright-eyed 6-year-old, looking up at her mother on the podium with pure adoration. Amelia stepped to the microphone, the setting sun glinting off the building behind her. "They say the best revenge is living well," she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the crowd. "But I've learned that's not quite right. The best revenge is building well. It's about taking the broken pieces of your life and using them not to build a fortress of anger, but to lay the foundation for something better, something that serves others." She spoke not of her personal struggles, but of the power of community of resilience and of the shared responsibility to build a world our children would be proud to inherit. Her gaze found Mina in the crowd, and a warm, genuine smile lit up her face. "This building is named for my daughter, Mina," she said, "to remind me and all of us that our true legacy isn't in the skylines we dominate, but in the futures we help to grow." Later, after the speeches and the applause, she stood on the rooftop garden with Mina looking out at the sprawling city. The Manhattan skyline where her old life had played out was visible in the distance, but her back was to it. She was looking forward at the vibrant neighborhood her work was helping to revitalize. She was no longer Amelia Vance, the millionaire's wife, nor was she just A.H. Phoenix, the anonymous blogger. She was Amelia Hayes, the CEO of Phoenix Architecture, a visionary who was reshaping the city, and a mother who had built a safe and beautiful world for her daughter. The ultimate revenge wasn't destroying Ethan Vance. It was proving him wrong. It was building a life so full of purpose, integrity, and love that his betrayal became nothing more than the prologue to a much greater story. She was the architect of her own life, and the foundation was unbreakable. Amelia Hayes's incredible story is a powerful testament to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. It's a journey that takes us from the highest peaks of luxury to the desolate valleys of betrayal, and back to a summit far greater than the one she left behind, a summit she built with her own 2 hands. Her story proves that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest power, and that true success isn't about getting revenge, but about rewriting your own destiny. What did you find most inspiring about Amelia's comeback? Have you ever witnessed someone turn a devastating setback into their ultimate triumph? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. The whisper of silk, the glint of a diamond, the sweet scent of impending fatherhood. Amelia had orchestrated the perfect surprise. A gift not just of luxury, but of love sent to her husband's gleaming corporate office. It was a testament to their shared future, a future she carried gently within her. But in the sterile air of that high-rise, another woman's hands adorned with rings he'd also bought would tear open the carefully wrapped package. The scream that followed wasn't one of delight. It was a sound that would shatter the pristine facade of their perfect life, exposing a web of deceit so intricate that the truth would be the most devastating blow of all. Amelia traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. From the 35th floor of their penthouse apartment, the city sprawled beneath her like a glittering tapestry, a world she and Julian had conquered together. Or rather, a world Julian had conquered and she had graciously adorned. Her reflection in the panoramic window showed a woman who had everything a husband whose name echoed in the halls of finance, a home that graced the covers of architectural magazines, and a baby, their baby nestled safely in her womb. She was 6 months along the gentle swell of her stomach, a constant, wondrous reminder of the new life she was nurturing. This pregnancy, a hard-won miracle after years of quiet heartbreak, had cemented what she believed to be an unbreakable bond with Julian. He had been ecstatic, his usual cool demeanor melting away to reveal a man of surprising tenderness. He'd ordered a custom-built crib from a bespoke furniture maker in Italy, filled a room with every conceivable baby gadget, and massaged her swollen ankles every night with a devotion that brought tears to her eyes. Julian was a man of grand gestures. Their life was a testament to it. Their wedding had been a week-long affair on the Amalfi Coast. Her birthdays were marked by surprise trips to Paris or the acquisition of a rare piece of art. He'd once bought out an entire Michelin-starred restaurant for a private dinner, simply because she'd mentioned a craving for their truffle pasta. He called her his queen, his everything. And Amelia, swept away by the sheer force of his affection and the dazzling world he provided, had believed it. Every single word. Today was the anniversary of the day they'd first met. A detail she was sure Julian, in his whirlwind of meetings and multi-million-dollar deals, had forgotten. But Amelia hadn't. She cherished these small, intimate milestones. They were the invisible threads that wove their grand love story together. To commemorate it, she had planned a surprise that was both deeply personal and a nod to the life he so meticulously curated. She had commissioned a one-of-a-kind timepiece, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, with a secret inscription on the back. It wasn't a flamboyant, diamond-encrusted model. It was classic, elegant, timeless. Everything she felt their love was. The inscription was a line from a poem they'd both loved in college, a poignant reminder of their humbler beginnings before the towering skyscrapers and private jets. My soul, your soul, 2 stars in the same sky. But the watch was only part of the gift. Tucked inside the luxurious lacquered box was a small silver-plated frame. Inside it wasn't a photo of them, but the first sonogram picture of their baby, the tiny, grainy image that had made Julian weep with joy. And beside it, a handwritten note on her thick, cream-colored stationery. My dearest Julian, remember the starry nights on that rusty fire escape, dreaming of a future we could barely imagine today on the anniversary of our first hello. I wanted to give you something to remind you that even in our dazzling sky, some stars shine just for us. This little one is our newest star. I love you more than words can say. Happy anniversary. Forever yours, Amelia. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. It was perfect. She had arranged for a premium courier service, the kind that handled priceless art and sensitive tournaments, to deliver it to his office at precisely 3 p.m. She imagined his surprise, his colleagues catching a glimpse of the devoted family man behind the ruthless CEO. She pictured him calling her, his voice thick with emotion, thanking her for remembering, for loving him so completely. The courier, a man in a crisp uniform, arrived exactly on time. He handled the elegantly wrapped package with the reverence it deserved. Amelia gave him the address. Sterling Whitcroft Holdings, 48th floor, 1 Vanderbilt, Manhattan. The name of the building itself was a symbol of power and prestige, a fitting stage for her grand romantic gesture. Please ensure this is handed directly to Mr. Julian Croft, she instructed, pressing a generous tip into the courier's hand. It's of immense personal value. Of course, Mrs. Croft. It will be delivered with the utmost care. As the door clicked shut, a wave of contentment washed over her. She settled onto the plush velvet sofa, picking up a book on motherhood. The afternoon sun streamed in, casting a warm glow on the pages. For the next hour, she was lost in a world of feeding schedules and developmental milestones, her heart full of a quiet, unshakable joy. She was Amelia Croft, the cherished wife of a brilliant man, soon to be the mother of his child. Her world was perfect, secure, and shimmering with love. The scream that would tear it all apart was still hours away, an impossible sound in a life so meticulously soundproofed from reality. Julian's office was an extension of his personality, sleek, modern, and intimidating. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, but the real power was inside the room. A massive mahogany desk, an array of monitors displaying fluctuating market data, and a collection of abstract art that was both expensive and emotionally distant. It was a space designed to communicate dominance. His executive assistant, a woman in her late 50s with a stern but efficient demeanor, guarded the entrance to this inner sanctum like a hawk. She vetted his calls, managed his impossible schedule, and could spot a sycophant from a mile away. Her name was Margaret, and she was fiercely loyal to Julian. She was also, Amelia knew, fond of her. Margaret often commented on how Amelia was a calming influence on her demanding boss. When the courier arrived at the 48th floor, it was Margaret he met. A package for Mr. Julian Croft, the courier announced, presenting the beautifully wrapped box. Personal delivery. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't unusual for gifts to arrive, but this had a different feel. It was elegant, personal, not the usual ostentatious corporate gift basket. She recognized the expensive wrapping paper, the same kind Amelia had used for Julian's last birthday gift. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Thank you. I'll see that he gets it," she said, signing the electronic pad. She carried the gift towards Julian's office, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. The glass door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices from within. Julian's deep, confident tone and a lighter, feminine laugh that was decidedly not Amelia's. Margaret paused, This was the delicate part of her job, the part she hated, the part where she had to navigate the other side of Julian Croft's life, the side that Amelia in her gilded cage knew nothing about. The laugh belonged to Cassandra. Cassandra was a senior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department. She was whip-smart, ambitious, and stunningly beautiful in a way that was the polar opposite of Amelia's classic elegance. Where Amelia was soft curves and gentle smiles, Cassandra was sharp angles and a predatory gaze. She had raven black hair cut in a severe, stylish bob, and a wardrobe of form-fitting dresses that were just on the edge of office appropriate. She was a shark in a sea of sharks, and she had set her sights on Julian Croft from the day she'd walked into the firm. Margaret had seen it all unfold. The late-night strategy sessions, the business trips that coincidentally involved a layover in a romantic city, the lingering touches and shared glances that crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with stock prices. She despised Cassandra, not just for the blatant affair, but for the danger she posed to the kind, unsuspecting woman who was carrying Julian's child. She could hear their conversation more clearly now. "The deal is sealed. We'll announce the acquisition on Monday," Julian was saying. "We should celebrate." Cassandra purred, her voice dripping with suggestion. "My place tonight. I'll open that bottle of single malt you like." "I can't tonight, Cass. Amelia is—" He trailed off, but Margaret could fill in the blank. "Amelia is pregnant. Amelia is waiting for me at home." "Right." The little wifey Cassandra's tone was laced with a derision she barely tried to conceal. "How is she, by the way?" Still enjoying her life as a professional lunchgoer, Margaret's hand tightened on the package. The insult to Amelia was a physical blow. She despised this woman's cruelty. "Be nice." Julian's voice was firm, but it lacked real conviction. He never defended Amelia with the ferocity he used to defend a business deal. "I'm just saying," Cassandra continued, undeterred. "You're here closing the biggest deal of the year, a titan of the industry, and she's at home." "What, picking out nursery colours?" "It's a bit of a mismatch, don't you think?" Before Julian could respond, Margaret decided to make her presence known. She knocked sharply on the doorframe. "Julian. A personal delivery for you." Julian looked up, his expression shifting from one of intimate conspiracy to professional command in a split second. Cassandra, however, didn't bother to school her features. She shot Margaret a look of pure annoyance, angry at the interruption. "Bring it in." "Margaret," Julian said, gesturing towards his desk. As Margaret walked in, Cassandra's eyes landed on the gift. Her expression changed from annoyance to a covetous curiosity. It was clearly expensive, clearly personal, and in Cassandra's mind, anything personal and expensive belonging to Julian should by rights be related to her. "Ooh, what's this?" "An admirer?" she asked, stepping forward. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over the silk ribbon. "Let me guess. A gift from the board for closing the Henderson deal." "It's from my wife, Julian," said a little too quickly. He made a move to take the box, but Cassandra was faster. With a playful, possessive flick of her wrist, she snatched it from Margaret's grasp. "From Amelia." Cassandra's red lips curled into a smirk. "How sweet." "What did she get?" "Another set of monogrammed handkerchiefs." "Cassandra, give it to me." Julian's voice held a warning tone. This was a line he wasn't prepared to cross in front of his assistant. But Cassandra was fueled by arrogance and a desire to needle him, to assert her place in his life. She saw herself not as the mistress, but as his true partner, the one who understood his world of power and ambition. Amelia was just a domestic accessory. "Oh, don't be such a spoil-sport." "Darling," she cooed, her voice loud enough for anyone passing in the hallway to hear. "I want to see what perfect taste your perfect wife has. Let's open it together." And with that, before Julian or Margaret could react, Cassandra's sharp, blood-red nails tore into the elegant wrapping paper. She ripped it open with a careless, almost violent motion, a stark contrast to the love and care with which Amelia had wrapped it just hours before. The lid of the Patek Philippe box was revealed. Cassandra's eyes widened with genuine surprise and a flash of greed. "Well, well, Mrs. Croft has expensive taste," she murmured, lifting the heavy lid. The classic, understated beauty of the Calatrava gleamed up at them. For a moment there was silence. Julian stared, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Margaret held her breath, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. And then Cassandra saw what was nestled beside the watch. She picked up the small silver frame. She tilted it towards the light. Her brow furrowed in confusion. And then she saw it, the grainy black-and-white image. The unmistakable shape of a fetus, her face a mask of triumphant arrogance just seconds before contorted. The color drained from her cheeks, her crimson lips parted. And then she screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise or delight. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated shock and horror. A sound of a carefully constructed reality, shattering into a million pieces. A sound that echoed through the glass-walled office out into the hushed professional quiet of the 48th floor. A primal cry of a secret blown wide open. The scream ripped through the sterile air of the 48th floor, sharp and visceral. It was a sound that didn't belong amidst the quiet hum of servers and the muted ringing of phones. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. The low murmur of business chatter ceased. In that one piercing moment, every eye on the floor was turned towards the glass-walled office of Julian Croft. Inside the scene was frozen. Julian stood, his face a ghastly shade of pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and panic. Margaret was rooted to the spot, her professional composure finally cracking as she stared at the unfolding disaster, and Cassandra was trembling. Her hand clapped over her mouth, as if to shove the scream back down her throat. Her other hand still held the silver frame, but her knuckles were white, her grip so tight it threatened to crush the delicate object. What is this?" she finally whispered, her voice a ragged, broken thing. She thrust the sonogram picture towards Julian, her eyes wild and accusing. "What is this?" "Julian!" Julian finally jolted into action, lunged forward and snatched the frame from her hand. He grabbed the watchbox, shoving the picture and the handwritten note back inside with clumsy, frantic movements. "Get out!" he hissed at Cassandra, his voice low and venomous. "Get out now!" But Cassandra wasn't listening. Her gaze was locked on his face, searching for an answer, a denial, anything. You told me you were leaving her. You said the marriage was just for appearances, a business arrangement." Her voice began to rise again, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "You don't have a baby with a business arrangement, Julian." I said. "Get out!" he roared, his voice finally exploding, echoing his earlier command, but now filled with raw, desperate anger. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, and began to physically propel her towards the door. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling against his grip. "You lied to me. All this time you've been lying to me." The spectacle was now on full display for the entire senior management floor. Colleagues, rivals, and subordinates alike were staring their faces a mixture of shock, fascination, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. The pristine facade of Julian Croft, the untouchable master of the universe, was cracking right before their eyes. Margaret, her training kicking in, moved swiftly to the door. "Everything is fine," she announced in a firm, commanding voice to the gawking crowd. "Mr. Croft is handling a private matter. Please return to your work." She pulled the door shut, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the charged silence. She then turned back to the chaos within. Julian had managed to shove Cassandra out of his office, slamming the door behind her. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his tie askew. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time Margaret had ever seen. He looked cornered, trapped. Through the glass wall they could see Cassandra stumbling back to her own desk, a trail of stunned and whispering colleagues in her wake. She collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent sobs. The damage was done. The secret was out. The carefully compartmentalized worlds of Julian Croft had just collided with the force of a nuclear explosion. Julian turned his eyes, finally landing on Margaret. His expression was one of pure fury, but it was the desperate fury of a man who has lost control. Not a word of this to anyone, Margaret, he seethed, especially not to Amelia. "Do you understand me?" Margaret met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. For years, she had been his loyal soldier, his gatekeeper, the silent facilitator of his double life. She had rationalized it as part of the job, a necessary evil in the high-stakes world they inhabited. But the sound of Cassandra's scream, the sight of that tiny sonogram picture, had shifted something within her. It was no longer an abstract indiscretion. It was a betrayal of a woman she respected, a woman who was blissfully awaiting the birth of her child. "She is going to call Julian." "Margaret," said her voice, steady and cool. "She is expecting you to thank her for your gift. What are you going to say?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Julian stared at the Patek Philippe box on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. The gift, meant to be a symbol of love and shared history, had become an instrument of his exposure. Amelia's perfect, heartfelt gesture had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He snatched the box, opened it, and pulled out the handwritten note. He read Amelia's loving words, her reference to their shared past, her excitement for their future. His face, already pale, seemed to lose another shade of color. The sincerity of her love, the purity of her intentions, was a searing indictment of his own duplicity. "I'll handle it," he muttered, shoving the note into his pocket. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's contact photo, a picture of her smiling, radiant on a beach in the Maldives. He looked like a man about to walk to his own execution. Meanwhile, back in her sun-drenched penthouse, Amelia was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. It was now well past 4 p.m. She had expected a call from Julian almost immediately. He was usually so prompt, so effusive in his gratitude for her gifts. She pictured the scene in his office again, but this time a small, unwelcome detail crept in the press of his schedule, an important meeting he couldn't leave, a sudden market crisis demanding his attention. She reassured herself. He was a busy man. That was part of the package. He would call when he could. She tried to go back to her book, but the words blurred on the page. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages. She decided to call him. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "You've reached Julian Croft. I'm unavailable at the moment. Please leave a message." This was unusual. Julian prided himself on his accessibility, at least to her. His phone was an extension of his hand. For him not to answer was strange. For him not to have called her by now was almost unheard of. A tiny seed of anxiety began to sprout in the fertile ground of her waiting. She told herself she was being silly, that the pregnancy hormones were making her oversensitive. She made herself another cup of herbal tea, the steam warming her hands, but not the chill that was beginning to creep into her heart. Back on the 48th floor, Julian was staring at his phone, watching Amelia's call go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her. Not now. Not when the sound of Cassandra's scream was still ringing in his ears. What would he say? How could he possibly feign the delight and emotion she would be expecting? His voice would betray him. His guilt was a physical thing, a sour taste in his mouth. He looked at the gift box. He had to hide it. He couldn't take it home. Amelia would expect to see him wearing the watch. She would ask where he had put the picture frame. The entire gift was now radioactive, a piece of evidence in a crime he was desperate to conceal. He looked at Margaret, his eyes pleading. "I need you to what, Julian?" She cut him off, her tone sharp. "To lie for you, to clean up this mess. My job is to manage your schedule, not your infidelities." The insubordination was shocking, and they both knew it. But Margaret had reached her limit. Julian's face hardened. "You will do what I tell you to do, Margaret. Your loyalty is to me and to this company. Your very generous salary depends on it." The threat hung in the air, ugly and undisguised. Margaret stared back at him, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of complicity, she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of its usual warmth. "Take this," he said, pushing the Patek Philippe box towards her. "Get it out of here. I don't care what you do with it. Sell it. Throw it in the Hudson River. Just make sure it disappears. And it never ever gets back to my wife." He then turned his attention to the more immediate problem, Cassandra. He strode out of his office, ignoring the renewed whispers and stares, and marched directly to her desk. "My office." "Now," he commanded. Cassandra, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, looked up at him with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. She followed him back to his office, and he shut the door firmly behind them. "You have 5 minutes to pack your personal belongings," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Security will escort you from the building. Your severance package will be generous. But it is contingent on you signing a non-disclosure agreement, so comprehensive it will prevent you from even thinking my name." "Is that clear?" Cassandra stared at him aghast. "You're firing me." Her voice was a choked whisper. "After everything. After all your promises." "The promises were based on a discretion you have just proven incapable of," Julian retorted icily. "You created a scene. You disrupted the entire floor. You are a liability. The situation is over. You are over." The cruelty was breathtaking. The man who had whispered promises of a future together was now discarding her like a failed business venture. Cassandra's heartbreak curdled into a cold, hard rage. "You think you can just get rid of me," she hissed. "You think you can silence me with money. You have no idea who you're messing with, Julian. I know everything. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the Cayman deal. I know where all the bodies are buried. You may have fired me from your company, but you are not rid of me." She turned and walked out of his office, her head held high, leaving a stunned Julian in her wake. He had solved one problem by firing her, but he had just created a much, much bigger one. He had underestimated Cassandra's fury, and he had no idea just how far she would go to get her revenge. And miles away in the quiet luxury of her penthouse, Amelia looked at the clock. It was almost 5 p.m. The silence from her husband was no longer just strange. It was a screaming, gaping void that was starting to swallow her perfect world whole. She picked up her phone and dialed a different number. It was a number she rarely used, but one she knew by heart. It was Margaret's direct line at the office. "Margaret." "It's Amelia Croft," she said, trying to keep her voice light and casual. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been trying to reach Julian. Is he in a meeting? I sent a package over earlier, and I just wanted to make sure he received it." On the other end of the line, Margaret closed her eyes. She held the heavy Patek Philippe box in her lap. The lie Julian wanted her to tell felt like poison on her tongue. But the threat to her livelihood, the years of ingrained loyalty, and a flicker of misguided pity for the man whose life was imploding, made her hesitate. "Yes, Mrs. Croft." Margaret began, her voice carefully neutral. "He's just been pulled into an emergency conference call with the London office. The market is very volatile today. He did ask me to tell you that he received your gift and he loves it. He said he would call you the second he is free." The lie was delivered, the first of many, and as Amelia hung up, a wave of relief washed over her, chasing away the earlier anxiety. Of course, a market crisis. It all made sense. She was being silly oversensitive. Her Julian was just busy conquering the world. He loved her gift. Everything was fine. But Margaret, as she placed the phone back in its cradle, felt a profound sense of shame. She looked at the expensive box in her lap, the symbol of a pure love that had been so cruelly desecrated. She thought of the furious, vengeful woman who had just been fired and the kind, pregnant woman who had just been lied to. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was far from over. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Julian returned home that evening, the very picture of the doting husband. He came bearing a bouquet of Amelia's favorite peonies and a story expertly crafted of a frantic day-long crisis involving a sudden currency devaluation that had threatened a major European acquisition. "I'm so sorry, my love," he said, enveloping her in a hug. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, his lips carefully avoiding hers. "I was chained to my desk all day." "Margaret told you I got your gift." Amelia melted into his embrace, her earlier anxieties seeming foolish and distant. "She did. I'm just glad everything is okay." "Did you like it?" she asked, her eyes searching his for the emotional response she had been anticipating all day. Julian's performance was flawless. He smiled a warm, crinkling smile that almost reached his eyes. "Liked it, Amelia." I was speechless. "It's magnificent." "The Calatrava, it's a work of art. And the inscription, it took me right back to that fire escape." He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But the picture, that was the real gift. I almost lost it right there in front of the entire board. It was exactly what she had wanted to hear, the perfect reaction. Yet a tiny, almost imperceptible detail felt off." He spoke the words with practiced ease, But the genuine, soul-shaking emotion she had expected to see in his eyes wasn't quite there. It was like watching a brilliant actor play a part rather than witnessing a true, heartfelt reaction. But she dismissed the feeling as quickly as it came. He was tired. It had been a long, stressful day. "Where is it?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. "I expected you to come home wearing it." Julian didn't miss a beat. "Are you crazy?" "A Patek Philippe. That beautiful." I took one look at it and locked it straight in the office safe. "It's far too valuable to be worn every day, and especially not on a day as chaotic as today. I'd be terrified of scratching it. We'll take it out for our anniversary dinner on Saturday." It was a plausible, even sensible explanation. It was so Julian, protective of beautiful, expensive things. And so Amelia accepted it. She accepted his excuses, his carefully constructed narrative, the slight distance in his kiss. She wanted to believe him. Her entire world, the very foundation of her happiness, depended on it. Life returned to its glossy, perfect rhythm. Julian went to the office, Amelia attended her prenatal yoga classes, and oversaw the final touches on the nursery. They talked about baby names, debated the merits of different strollers, and planned a baby moon in the Seychelles. Julian was attentive, charming, and affectionate, but Amelia couldn't shake a subtle, persistent feeling of unease. It was in the small things. He started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand, something he'd never done before. He was more jumpy, a sudden noise making him flinch. He claimed it was the residual stress from the market crisis, but there was a furtive, hunted look in his eyes that she'd never seen before. He also began to work later, claiming the European acquisition required late-night calls and endless paperwork. He would come home long after she had gone to bed, slipping under the covers, with the cool silence of a ghost. A week after the incident, Amelia had a doctor's appointment. It was a routine checkup, and she'd asked Julian to come with her, hoping they could hear the baby's heartbeat together again. He had agreed enthusiastically, but on the morning of the appointment, he called, his voice strained. "Darling, I'm so sorry. I'm completely swamped. We're in the final stages of due diligence on the Henderson deal. I can't possibly get away." "The Henderson deal?" Amelia asked, confused. "I thought that was the deal that closed last week, the one that caused the big crisis." There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line. No. That was the precursor. This is the final, painstaking legal work. It's incredibly tedious. I promise I'll be at the next one. Get me a new picture of our little star. Okay?" She hung up, a knot of disappointment tightening in her chest. She went to the appointment alone, sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by beaming couples. She listened to the strong, rhythmic thump of her baby's heart, a sound of profound joy that was now tinged with a lonely sadness. That afternoon, needing a distraction, she decided to do some shopping. As she browsed in a high-end baby boutique, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The subject line was blank. The sender was an address she didn't recognize, Karma. RSA bitch at protonmail.com. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. There was no text, just a single attachment, a video file. Hesitantly, she tapped to download it. It was short, only about 15 seconds long, and the quality was grainy, clearly filmed on a phone from a distance. The video showed a man and a woman standing outside a sleek, modern apartment building at night. They were arguing. The man was Julian. The woman was beautiful, with striking dark hair and a furious expression. Amelia's heart began to pound in her chest. She recognized the woman. She had seen her once or twice at company functions. Cassandra, an analyst from his firm. The audio was faint, but Amelia turned the volume all the way up, pressing the phone to her ear. "Can't just throw me away." Cassandra's voice was high and shrill. "The deal is done, Cassandra. It's over." Julian's voice was cold, dismissive. "Is it? Or are you just scared? Scared your perfect little wife will find out. Her perfect little life is a complete and utter lie." The video ended. Amelia stood frozen in the middle of the baby boutique, surrounded by soft pastels and cheerful animal motifs. The air left her lungs. A cold, terrifying dread, far worse than any anxiety she had felt before, washed over her. A lie. Her perfect life is a complete and utter lie. Her hands shaking, she stumbled out of the store, nearly colliding with another shopper. She hailed a taxi, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. An argument. It could be work-related. Cassandra had just been fired. Julian had told her for poor performance and a bad attitude. Maybe this was just the fallout from that. But Cassandra's words. "Scared your perfect little wife will find out." The words echoed in her head, a venomous chorus. No, it wasn't possible. Julian loved her. He was the father of her child. They were building a life together. This woman, this Cassandra, was just a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee trying to cause trouble. That had to be it. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root, and it was growing its thorny vines wrapping around her heart. When she got home, the penthouse felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, a beautifully decorated set for a play in which she was the unknowing lead. She walked into Julian's home office, a space she rarely entered. It was as immaculate as ever. She ran her hand over his desk, her eyes scanning for... she didn't even know what. Her gaze fell upon his briefcase, which he had left by his chair. On a sudden, uncharacteristic impulse, she opened it. Inside were files, a laptop, a leather-bound notebook. She picked up the notebook. His handwriting, a sharp, decisive script, filled the pages. It was mostly meeting notes, market analysis numbers. And then she saw it. Tucked into a side pocket of the notebook was a receipt. A jewelry receipt dated 2 months ago. It was from Cartier. The item purchased a Trinity ring. Amelia's breath caught. The Trinity ring. 3 interlocking bands of gold, a symbol of love, fidelity, and friendship. It was a beautiful, romantic piece, and Julian had not given it to her. Her mind flashed back to the video, to Cassandra's hands gesturing angrily. She remembered seeing the glint of gold on her finger. 3 interlocking bands. The blood drained from Amelia's face. She sank into Julian's leather office chair, the receipt trembling in her hand. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was his mistress. The late nights, the business trips, the sudden distance. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The lie wasn't just in the video. The lie was her entire life. And then a worse thought, a thought so monstrous it made her feel physically ill. The gift. The Patek Philippe. The sonogram. The story about the office safe suddenly seemed laughably thin. The praise for the gift felt hollow, rehearsed. Why had he really hidden it? What had really happened that day? The pieces began to form a horrifying mosaic in her mind. The scream that Cassandra had let out in the video. It was a scream of shock. What if she hadn't been screaming at Julian in the street? What if she had screamed in his office? Amelia's mind raced back to the day she sent the gift. Her call to Margaret. Margaret's smooth, reassuring lie. He's in a conference call. He loves the gift. Margaret. Margaret would know. She was Julian's gatekeeper. She saw everything, heard everything. And despite her professional demeanor, Amelia had always felt a current of warmth from the older woman, a hint of sympathy. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, Amelia stood up. The hurt, the betrayal. It was a physical weight threatening to crush her. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard anger. She had been played for a fool. Her love, her pregnancy, her most sacred feelings had been used as props in his sordid drama. She would not be a victim. She would find out the truth. The whole truth. She picked up her phone and dialed Margaret's number again. This time there would be no polite inquiries. This time there would be no accepting easy lies. "Margaret," she said, when the assistant answered her voice dangerously quiet. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. In person. I'm coming to the office now." Before Margaret could protest, Amelia hung up. She walked into her bedroom, her movements stiff and robotic. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The soft, happy woman from a week ago was gone. In her place was a woman with haunted eyes and a grim, determined set to her mouth. She was a queen, just as Julian had always said, but a queen whose kingdom had been revealed to be built on lies, and she was about to go to war. The taxi ride to 1 Vanderbilt was a blur. The familiar Manhattan cityscape, once a symbol of her and Julian's shared success, now seemed hostile and alien. Every gleaming skyscraper felt like a monument to a lie. Amelia sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly over her baby bump, a protective primal gesture. The naive, trusting woman, who had so lovingly sent a gift to her husband, was gone, incinerated in the fire of his betrayal. In her place was a woman, forged in cold fury, her mind whirring with a chilling clarity. She didn't go to the main entrance. She knew the protocol, the way visitors were announced, the chance that Julian would be alerted to her presence. Instead, she remembered a private entrance on the side street that led to a discreet elevator bank sold by the top executives. Margaret had pointed it out to her once. It was a small detail, a piece of insider knowledge, and she would use it. She was done playing by the rules of a game that had been rigged against her from the start. When she stepped out onto the 48th floor, the atmosphere was thick with a tension she could now finally understand. The whispers she might have once dismissed as office gossip now sounded like echoes of her own humiliation. She saw the sideways glances, the sudden silences as she walked past. They knew. They had all known. They had watched the drama unfold while she sat in her penthouse, blissfully ignorant. She walked directly to Margaret's desk, her gaze unwavering. The older woman looked up, her face pale. She saw the look in Amelia's eyes, and her professional mask crumbled. What she saw was not the gentle Mrs. Croft, but a woman on the verge of shattering, held together only by sheer force of will. "Mrs. Croft. Amelia, you shouldn't be here," Margaret stammered, standing up. "Don't, Amelia," said her voice low and steady, cutting through Margaret's flustered greeting. "Don't you dare lie to me again. Margaret, I know. I know about Cassandra. I know about the affair." Margaret's face fell. The years of carefully maintained composure dissolved into undisguised pity and regret. How she whispered. "That doesn't matter," Amelia said, her voice sharp. "What matters is what happened here last week. The day I sent the gift, I want you to tell me everything, every single detail. And if you value your conscience, you will not leave a single thing out. Julian was in a meeting in the main boardroom, a glass-walled enclosure in the center of the floor. He was visible to them, pacing, gesturing, commanding the room, completely unaware of the reckoning that was taking place just 50 feet away. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards Julian's office. Her loyalty, her job, her entire life was tied to that man. But then she looked back at Amelia. She saw the profound pain in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hands resting on her pregnant stomach. She thought of the beautiful, heartfelt gift and the ugly, violent way it had been desecrated. The lie she had told Amelia over the phone had been eating at her for a week. The guilt was a heavy, indigestible stone in her gut. "He made me get rid of it," Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. Amelia's blood ran cold. "Get rid of what?" "The gift. The watch. The picture of your baby." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Cassandra was in his office when it arrived. She thought it was for her. She opened it, and she saw the sonogram. She screamed. The whole floor heard it. It was a disaster. The scene played out in Amelia's mind, a horrifying, vivid nightmare. The woman who was sleeping with her husband, her hands on the picture of their unborn child. The scream, the humiliation. It was infinitely worse than anything she could have imagined. And Julian. Amelia pressed her voice devoid of emotion. "What did he do?" "He fired her. Right on the spot. Then he gave me the box and told me to make it disappear. He was terrified you would find out." "Where is it now?" Amelia's question was like a shard of ice. Margaret swallowed hard. She reached down into the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, a drawer she had kept locked all week. She pulled out the Patek Philippe box and placed it on the desk between them. Amelia stared at it. The elegant wrapping paper was gone, replaced by the stark lacquered wood. It looked like a tiny coffin. With trembling fingers, she opened the lid. The magnificent watch was there, gleaming cold and unused. Beside it, tucked away, was the silver frame with the sonogram and her handwritten note. She picked up the note. "My soul, your soul. 2 stars in the same sky." The words, once a declaration of transcendent love, were now a bitter, mocking epitaph. A tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped her and splashed onto the expensive cream stationery, blurring the ink. She wiped the tear away with an angry gesture. This was not the time for weeping. This was the time for action. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, her voice regaining its strength. She closed the box. "You've done the right thing." She looked over at the glass boardroom. Julian's meeting was wrapping up. People were starting to stand, shaking hands. He would be out in minutes. Margaret Amelia said, a new chilling plan forming in her mind. "Does this company have a town hall meeting scheduled any time soon?" An all-hands meeting for the entire New York office. Margaret looked confused. "Yes, there's one this Friday. Julian is the keynote speaker. It's a big quarterly address." "Perfect," Amelia said. She gave Margaret a look of such intense, cold resolve that the older woman physically recoiled. "I want you to do one more thing for me. And this time, it's not for Julian. It's for me. And for every woman who has ever been made to feel like a fool." 2 days later on Friday, the auditorium at Sterling Whitcroft Holdings was packed. Hundreds of employees, from fresh-faced interns to seasoned senior partners, filled the tiered seats. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air. The quarterly town hall was a major event, a chance to hear directly from the CEO. But today, the anticipation was laced with something else: gossip. The story of Cassandra's dramatic screaming exit and swift dismissal had spread like wildfire. Everyone knew something had happened, but the details were murky, speculative. Julian Croft stood at the podium on the brightly lit stage, looking every inch the powerful, confident leader. He was dressed in a bespoke suit, his voice resonant and assured as he spoke about quarterly earnings, market projections, and the company's bright future. He was in his element, the master of his universe. The chaos of the previous week firmly behind him. He had dealt with Cassandra. He had placated Amelia. The storm had passed. He was just moving into his closing remarks, a rallying cry about integrity and teamwork, when the main doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A figure was silhouetted in the doorway. It was a woman. As she walked down the central aisle, a stunned silence fell over the room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized her. It was Amelia Croft. She looked radiant, ethereal. She was wearing a simple but elegant white dress that accentuated her pregnancy. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like an angel, an avenging angel. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his words dying in his throat. His face went ashen. He stared at her, his confident posture collapsing, a look of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He knew in that instant that his world was about to end. Amelia didn't look at him. She walked calmly and deliberately towards the stage, her heels clicking with a steady, resolute rhythm on the floor. In her hands, she carried the Patek Philippe box. As she reached the short set of stairs leading to the stage, a few security guards started to move towards her, unsure of how to react. But Amelia simply gave them a serene, dismissive glance, and they stopped confused. She walked onto the stage and approached the podium, stopping directly in front of her husband. She could feel the collective gaze of hundreds of people on her, could hear the frantic whispering. She ignored it all. Her focus was entirely on Julian. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous room. "My husband," she began, her voice ringing with a strength no one in that room had ever heard from her, "is a man who speaks about integrity, about loyalty, about the values that make this company great." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian was frozen, paralyzed, a statue of a guilty man. "He is also a man of grand gestures," she continued, her voice gaining an edge. "And recently, to celebrate a personal milestone, the anniversary of the day we met, I decided to make a grand gesture of my own." She held up the lacquered box for the entire auditorium to see. The giant screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying stock charts, now showed a close-up of her face, her expression one of heart-breaking composure. "I bought him this," she said, her voice starting to tremble, but with rage, not weakness. "A Patek Philippe watch, a symbol of timeless love." But that wasn't the real gift. She opened the box and took out the small silver frame. She held it up. The camera zoomed in, and the grainy image of the sonogram filled the screens. A collective gasp went through the audience. "This was the real gift," she said, her voice breaking for a moment. "Our baby, our future." I sent it to his office, hoping to surprise him to share a moment of joy. She turned her gaze fully on Julian, her eyes locking with his. All the love she had ever felt for him was gone, replaced by a contempt so profound it was like a physical force. But I was not the only one who saw it. My husband's mistress, Cassandra Miller, a senior analyst he was sleeping with for over a year, opened it first. She saw the picture of my baby, the baby of the man who had promised to leave his wife for her, and she screamed. The auditorium erupted. The whispers turned into a roar of shock and scandal. This was better, more salacious than any rumor. This was a confession, a public crucifixion. He lied to me. Amelia's voice soared over the din filled with righteous fury. He fired his mistress to silence her. He took this beautiful gift, this symbol of our family, and he ordered it to be destroyed, to be hidden, so he could continue to live his lie. He stood in our home, looked me in the eye, and told me he loved it while secretly trying to erase its existence. She placed the sonogram picture on the podium, directly in front of Julian. Then she picked up the watch, the magnificent, priceless Patek Philippe Calatrava. My husband values beautiful, expensive things, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. He builds his life around them. He acquires them. He controls them. Women companies watches. It's all the same to him. And then, in a move that no one could have predicted, she drew back her arm, and with all her strength, she threw the Patek Philippe watch across the stage. It hit the far wall with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor. Its delicate mechanism shattered its timeless beauty, destroyed in an instant. The sound echoed through the silent, stunned auditorium. Amelia turned back to the microphone, her face a mask of triumphant, heartbreaking resolve. The assets of this man, of this company, may be vast, she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. But his integrity is bankrupt, his loyalty is worthless. And as for my assets, the shares in this company that I own in my own name, a very significant portion, I believe, they will be on the market by the end of the day. I believe the term is a hostile takeover. I'm sure you all, as experts in the field, know what that means. She looked one last time at the broken man who had been her husband. His face was slack with shock, his empire crumbling around him on a stage of his own making. Without another word, Amelia Croft turned and walked off the stage, her back straight, her head held high. She did not look back. She walked out of the auditorium, out of the building, and out of the life that had almost destroyed her, leaving behind a storm of her own creation. The Queen had not just left the board, she had flipped the entire table. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. It's a story of devastating betrayal, but also one of incredible strength and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman reclaiming her own narrative. The shattered watch was more than just a broken object. It was the sound of a gilded cage being smashed to pieces. What happens next? Does Julian's empire truly crumble? Does Amelia, with her newfound power and the impending birth of her child, find a new kind of happiness? The fallout from that day would echo for years to come. If this story captivated you, if you felt every moment of Amelia's pain and cheered for her ultimate triumph, please let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you're the first to know when our next story drops. Thank you for listening.